Hi everyone. I want to share some thoughts about something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and that is how important I believe it is in public conversations or private conversations about important issues like race, for us to create a culture where it is safe and okay for people to change their minds. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I've been seeing lots of conversations or people actually messaging me to say, I have this thought, but I'm really afraid to say it because I'm scared that it's going to make me look stupid or bad or prejudiced or ignorant. And so I don't know whether I can say it. And I really get that because there are a lot of problematic, prejudiced thoughts that have been allowed to fly around public discourse for many centuries that have really, really hurt people. And now we're in this place where we're being more careful with what we say and do so that we can create a world where more people feel safe and included. But my worry is that in creating a culture where it's not safe for people to say things that might be wrong and then change their minds, we're actually working against ourselves and stopping social progress. And I was really rooted into this because I was reading Malcolm X and I came across a sentence of his about mental flexibility. And he says, the mental flexibility of the wise man permits him to keep an open mind and enables him to readjust himself whenever it becomes necessary for a change. And I was so struck by that because Malcolm X is held up by many people as one of the greatest racial justice activists of the last century. And yet in many activist movements and conversations about social change, we can be really intolerant to the idea of people changing their minds. And there can be the sense that we all need to know exactly what we think right now and be right and kind of put our stake in the ground and hold our perspective, and that's us forever. And in particular, in polarized issues like race, it can be a thing of like, well, what you're saying is right or what you're saying is wrong, and there's no real space for people to kind of learn or grow or change their minds. And I think there's a certain value to really holding strong in your perspective, but also for us to create enough space for people's perspectives to change and evolve. And actually the entire possibility of social progress hinges off the possibility of us evolving our thoughts. Like, let's not forget that less than 200 years ago, many, many people believed that slavery was a good thing, was a fair thing, that legally owning another human being as property was right. And less than 100 years ago in the UK, there were members of parliament, men, standing up and arguing for why women shouldn't have the vote. I was reading through archives, just found some absolutely mind-blowing statements, which I'll read you one from one MP, Sir John Peel, who said in 1917, women are tremendously accessible, extraordinarily impressionable, noted for the adoption of any new thing and for easy acceptance of other people's views, are those qualities which fit women to rule over the home and foreign affairs of a mighty empire. You have to kind of do it in that voice of a mighty empire. And I mean, clearly everything about that statement is absolutely despicable, not least the calling of Britain as a mighty empire, but it wasn't deemed despicable at the time. And so I think it's really useful for us to start thinking about changing our perspectives, not as changing our minds or being weak or flaky or wrong, but as evolving thought, and that this process of evolving thought is actually the fuel of social progress. It's a good thing. And one of the most effective ways for us to evolve thought is to be able to be in conversation with each other, for us to be able to say, well, this is my perspective, what's yours? And to hear a different perspective and to let that perspective shine into the corners of where your perspective might be wrong or incomplete or outdated. And through this conversation and through this widening of perspectives, we evolve our own thinking, we change our minds. And for that to happen, we really need to have a culture where it's safe to say things that you might in 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years think were wrong and stupid. And I particularly think about this in conversations of race because I think people are at a heightened level of afraid to make a misstep. And I remember having a conversation with a man a while ago, and he was saying to me about, well, I have a view, but I don't want to say it because then you'll think I'm a racist. I'm like, okay, try me. And his perspective was that, black on black crime is higher than police on black crime, so shouldn't we be talking about that? Now, I won't go into what we talked about, but I really explained my perspective, rooted in data, and through that conversation, his thinking was able to be evolved. Now, I definitely don't profess that all conversations are going to go that way, but it really struck me in that moment how important it was to create spaces for dialogue, even with perspectives that might seem really unpalatable, because it's through that dialogue that those perspectives can change. And I think one of the most amazing things about allowing minds to change is that when we change our mind, we don't just move to a new perspective, we increase our ability to hold perspectives. What I mean by that is that when you change your mind, you can then see the issue from two sides. So you can see it from the perspective that you used to see it from, and you can see it from the new place. And so that really opens up this beautiful space of empathy where you're the same person, but you just hold a different view. And so for all of the people who hold the view that you used to hold, you don't look at them as wicked or evil. You just see, well, they haven't seen yet what I now see. And for me, that's hugely powerful because it means that we can extend grace to people who still believe what we once believed. So I want to, in the spirit of really celebrating and taking the shame out of changing your mind on important issues, share a couple of places where my own thinking has been evolved in the last month. And I can also say that it feels unsteady to do this because, especially if you're a teacher or sharing things that people are listening to, you can even more feel like, well, I need to stay in my position of being right because then people won't trust what I'm saying going forward. So it's really important to me to share that even sharing this is scary for me. So I empathize with people who feel afraid to say they've changed their mind. But the first one for me, when I look back to the article I wrote on performative allyship a few months ago, I was really clear on what I was saying in that article. But when I read it back now, I can see that in many ways I was very binary about white people and black people. I think I said something like, if you're white, no matter how nice you are, you're complicit in this system. And I think that's partially true, but as my thinking has evolved, as I've had more conversations, I've realized that in collapsing that binary, well, first of all, I completely wrote out all people who were neither white nor black. So I kind of put all the responsibility on white people for anti-black racism, but there is a whole other spectrum of different ethnicities and races of people who might also hold anti-black racism, and I didn't consider that at all in the article. So in that way, my thinking's really evolved, and if I were to go back and write the article, I would have made it much more clear that I was talking about anti-black racism, and then I would have included a wider range of races and not just white people. And another thing in that article, I spoke about how one of the ways that you could use your privilege is to look at the supply chain of the things you're buying. Look at the violence that's enacted against workers in Africa. And again, I said, this is for white people, but of course I am just as responsible for the violence that's enacted in supply chains for people in Africa. Just because I'm black, it doesn't mean that I'm not also a part of that system. So again, in kind of trying to simplify, I really did miss a nuance that I can now see. The other place where my thinking's really evolved is I did a infographic of 5 things that weren't allyship. The last one was debating, and I said, all lives matter. If all lives matter, people are energy vampires who just don't get it, something like that. And again, I really still see the partial truth in that. Like, I see a lot of people getting lost in debates with people who are saying all lives matter, racism doesn't exist, who aren't truly seeking to engage in constructive dialogue, but who are just seeking to discredit and neutralize the conversation. And I do still stand by the fact that getting lost in conversations with those people is probably not that effective for most of us. However, as I've had more conversations with people, I've seen that not everyone who is saying all lives matter is seeking to be antagonistic, discrediting. Some people just haven't understood why we're saying Black Lives Matter. And that by lumping all of those people together, I'm kind of doing the same thing, which is those people are wrong, don't listen to them, don't talk to them, it's just us. Recreating patterns of division that I really don't need to be doing. So again, if I were to go back to that, I might make it more clear that I'm talking about people who are saying all lives matter with explicit intent to be antagonistic and against progress, fairness, justice. And there are probably countless other places where I can look at things I've said and think, well, actually my thinking's now evolved, and that's okay. And I really just want to extend the branch for all of us who are seeking to engage in creating a more just world, whether that be a more racially just world or a more just world for the environment, for women, for refugees, for any issue, to be far more comfortable with saying, I thought this, and that doesn't mean I was a terrible person, but now I know more, I now think this. Or I used to do this, doesn't mean I was a terrible person, but now I know more, I do this. And that there's just so much beauty in allowing ourselves to collectively say, let's keep evolving our minds, because evolution of thought is the fuel that drives social progress, which is ultimately what we're all trying to get to. So I hope that this is a little sharing on why it's so important for us to create a safer culture for disagreement, for mind changing, for discussion of thought, and a personal offering of courage to you to say, it's okay to say where your thinking used to be not as good as it is now. That's a sign of growth and commitment. That's a beautiful thing. So we should all look back on what we thought 2 years ago and say, well, that wasn't a very good idea, because that means we're thinking. Yeah, thank you very much.